Hi, my dear students. Happy to see you again. This video is going to cover two classes. Classes number 8, dealing with specific conditions, and class number 9, interventions. The reason why I'm covering these two is because they're closely connected, and class number 9 is going to be mostly practice. So there's no need for me to lecture much about that. So specific conditions, you've read about some of these conditions. Of course, psychotherapy is about dealing with whatever comes to you. But some issues are very common, and we can presuppose or assume that you will be dealing with anxiety, you will be dealing with depression, you will be dealing with issues of anger. I've chosen these because these are 3 examples of how we can embrace what you learned from previous classes into dealing with these approaches, and how the transpersonal approach comes and enriches that. And then towards the end, we're going to talk a little bit about some specific interventions. And again, more than talking about them, we're going to be practicing them in class in the future, in the classes to come. Something that you probably noticed, and we talked about it in the previous video, is that we spend the first few weeks or sessions talking about being. What is transpersonal? How can you be a transpersonal psychotherapy? The reason being that you cannot fake being a transpersonal psychotherapy. Transpersonal psychotherapy is not something that you do to the client. It's something that you be. It's something that you are. So if you don't have a transpersonal inclination, if you don't have a grasp of what body, mind, spirit means, you won't be able to really work effectively. We've said over and over that the transpersonal psychotherapist, one of the prerequisites is that he or she works in him or herself as they do the work. So that's why we spend so much time in being, but now we're moving into the doing area, as I said in the last video. And we began with assessment, and then this is about this specific condition. So let's start. The first one that I want to bring to your attention is depression. Depression is really, really huge. It's well, even before, let me go back just for a moment there, just to see, just to show you that this is live, and I am not editing these recordings. As you know very well from therapeutic communication, from clinical relationship, emotions are not evil. They are not right and wrong emotions. Emotions are messengers, and it's important to honor the messenger. Depression is one of these messengers, as well as anxiety and fear and all of them. But we'll start with depression. Many traditions talk about the journey into the darkness, from Inanna's Psyche, Orpheus, they all go into the darkness. Hinapu, Nixbalanque into the Mayan tradition. It's part of the hero's journey. Part of the hero's journey is to go in the dark night of the soul, in a way. The problem is that our society has pathologized it. So first, that what we need to do is to see depression as one part of our journey. Not everybody's going to go through this particular journey, which is obvious. Not all stories are the same. But don't see it as necessarily as pathology, but as part of this story, and engage it as such. If you remember Groff, when talks about the coexes, he talks about the second matrix. We talk about them in non-ordinary state of consciousness. This second matrix is when the cervix is closed down, when their contractions begin, and the child has this experience of being rejected and not without fault. I didn't do anything, but I feel rejected from this womb. And Groff would say that that is very common in the human experience. People that have been affected or have issues to resolve regarding second perinatal matrix are going to be dealing with issues of depression. Everything seems gloom. Everything seems like there's no hope. There's no need. There's no, not need, no. There's no purpose of everything in anything. And that is depression. As I said, now we see it as a problem, and since the advent of SSRIs, we see not only a problem, but a problem that can be solved with a pill. And I'm not going to go into psychopharmacology here. I'm not necessarily against pills, but I hope it's important for you to know that psychopharmacology treats the cause, treats the symptoms, not the cause. And it's well known that psychopharmacology or medication works better with psychotherapy. Psychotherapy that helps you deal with the deeper issues, and psychiatry or medication that helps you be able to mobilize your energy so you're not so depressed and you cannot deal with these issues. And again, it's important for you to see how different traditions work with depression. Just for example, the Native American, and you read a lot about depression in the readings, and I hope you come up with questions about that. But the Native Americans, for example, they see depression as a spirit that is visiting you. And as such, what does the spirit want? So you develop a relationship with depression. What does the spirit or depression in this case wants to tell you? What triggers it? What type of depression are we talking about? And then you begin developing this. So it's not just, oh, I have depression, let me take the pill. But no, let's understand it. Let's go deep into it. Let's try to understand what are the stories behind it? What are the stories are we telling ourselves? And here we move into narrative therapy. Does the client believe those stories? John Wellwood talks about that. And because that's going to help us understand how are we going to work with this and give us a sense of how the client makes sense of whatever is going on. And again, it's important to separate developmental depression from loss. Depression is different in different stages of life, and it's important to figure it out. And we could work on it in those different levels, right? From narcissistic wounding to ungrieved loss to abandoning depression, body inhibition, and so on and so forth. Assagioli talks beautifully about this idea that depression is this idea of being disconnected from the source. And again, we have to balance this transpersonal idea so it doesn't become a bypassing attempt. But just think about that idea. What if what we're really mourning is this sense of separation? And that's where and how transpersonal can help. So understanding how whether this client is suffering from feeling isolated, from feeling not belonging, and trying to see how can we help the client belong. So this idea of Sayoli is actually interesting, which is the same idea of St. John of the Cross in the Dark Night of the Soul. This idea of being expelled from paradise, to its use just another metaphor. The Dark Night of the Soul is this idea that God has closed the door. So once you felt connected to it, and again, think perinatal matrix, once I was in heaven and now I'm not anymore. And probably I did something wrong, something so wrong that I have been expelled from paradise. And that's just one metaphor. But again, using myth to understand this idea, we can begin to get what is this client longing for? What is this client sad about? And of course, depression is way more than sadness. But what is he missing? What is she lacking that makes them feel depressed? Trust the depression. Again, this idea of developing a relationship with the depression so we can see what it wants to communicate. Depression, in one of the readings, I forget which one is, they talk about being an ego side. The ego that is not able to solve this. We could call it the false self for that matter. That is not able to keep everything together and under control as it did. So it feels lacking. So as such, we want to understand, and Groff is very, he really likes to clarify this. When people want to commit suicide, often it's not that they want to kill themselves. They just want to kill their ego. And that's what we need to help them. Not necessarily kill it, but to transcend it. Remember, include and transcend, so they develop something larger than their ego in which they can hold and experience life. So that's just an idea for starting point about how to work with depression. I'll invite you to think about it and to bring it into the class with your thoughts, how that would work. The second one, and we're just going to go one after the other. The second one is fear and anxiety. Uh, Fear and anxiety are a huge part of mental illness. More than 80% of all doctor visits are stress related. And stress in many ways is a kind of anxiety, is a kind of fear. The difference between fear and anxiety, as you probably know from Gestalt, is that in fear, you know what you're afraid of. And in anxiety is a general sense of danger, a fear of what could happen. In We know now that one of the problems of stress is that we feel constantly in a sense of doom. Something is about to happen, so we have to be on top of it. We have to, and again, remember, ego wants to control, and we can track this back to childhood again, or perhaps even perinatal, but let's use childhood this time to make a distinction. Something very bad happened to the baby, and again, it could be the expulsion from the womb, heaven, or it could be, you know what? Since I'm out here, I've been hungry and I've been wet and some things hurt. And I don't want that to ever happen again. So the ego develops that reaction of I never again. A favorite phrase of ego is never again. I'm going to control, I'm going to manipulate my body and my environment, so whatever happened doesn't happen ever again. And of course, we know from a transpersonal perspective that's a foolish game. There's no way that we can control whatever life brings to us. So help us to understand that fear is this an attempt to control, and the transpersonal approach and the existential approach allows us to begin figuring out that there's no way that we can have control. Can we be okay with that? Mhm. So in many ways, what we need to do is to help the client understand what are those defenses that are making them afraid. What are they afraid of? Most people are organized around fear and anxiety. So what is that organization? Again, what are they afraid of? Remember, I don't know, Roosevelt, I think, was this idea. The only thing to be afraid is fear itself. Well, that's very important to understand. Yeah. Could it be that at the end is the fear of not being? Some even suggest that all pathology is fear of death. That all fear is fear of death. If you play with this, I do play with my clients often with this idea. Well, what would happen if you were to lose your job? Well, my partner would leave me. And what would happen if your partner would leave me? Well, I would never see my children again and my family again. And what would happen? And I would lose my house. And and you keep going. Eventually you get to this place. I'll be all alone and then I'll die. So when you start exploring this is a very existential approach, but when you start looking at it from that perspective, say, does this make sense? Does this make sense to be afraid of this? Can you find something larger than yourself? Is there a way that you can trust the universe? You can trust yourself. You can trust life. You can trust God. Meditation helps you to learn, for example, using interventions, to learn to be with the impermanence of things without trying to control things. Prayer helps you to connect with something or someone bigger than you that you can put your faith on. So again, these are ways in which you can help to that. And of course, this is connected with other approaches. For example, CBT is really helpful with fear and anxiety. And you can use that together with meditation, for example, or CBT together with prayer, and they work fantastically. So these are some ideas for us to discuss in class and chew upon when we deal with fear and anxiety. The last one that I want to bring here is anger. Anger has had a bad rap in general. Just think, when you think about somebody angry, what do you think? Usually we don't think, oh, poor person, he's had a bad day. When someone blows up in the supermarket or in a restaurant, most of us become judgmental. We see fear as something bad. As a matter of fact, just to give you an idea, the traditions are not that far away from that. In the Buddhist tradition, in the wheel of life, there are three poisons: ignorance, desire, and anger. Anger is one of those three poisons in life. It is important to understand that anger is just another emotion and is a healthy one. Of course, we know that often anger is masquerading other emotions, sadness, and so on and so forth, usually sadness. But anger is healthy when it's a reaction to our boundaries being crossed. Our boundaries are being crossed. A normal and healthy answer is to get angry. When there is an injustice, and that's more psychological, but when something is wrong, we get angry. We don't like injustice. It's embedded in our beingness that we don't like anger. Sorry, we don't like injustice. So if you think as all emotions, they are really life enhancing. I actually like to tell my clients in a kind of a reframe, you get angry because you care. You care so much that you get angry about it. So again, just like we're doing with depression, just like we're doing with fear, get as the saying goes, the old saying goes, get curious, not furious, right? What is behind anger? What is that thing that is so important that makes me so angry about it? So instead of going judgmental, try to understand what is underneath that anger. And sometimes I talk about anger as divine fire, right? If you think in the tantric tradition, you see all these wrathful deities that they're enlightened beings, but full of anger, and the anger is to burn something that is not helpful anymore. If you think about the Christian tradition, Jesus getting angry towards the money exchangers, money lenders in the temple, right? So there is a place for anger. Often what happens is that the client is confusing anger with aggression. And we have to help them understand that one is the emotion and one is the choice. And often the key is to help them develop space for awareness between the emotions and the reaction. So instead of reacting, they can choose an action. They can respond. Remember that respond is the ability to respond, to be able to respond, to do something about it. So help them to understand this emotion, honor this emotion. You can also see it as a spirit, as a wrathful deity. Sometimes I do ask clients to put to get an image, or I give them a copy of an image, a wrathful deity, so they begin to relate to an anger, to a teacher, an honorable teacher that is worth uh, uh, listening to. Listen to it, cultivate it, see as fire. Again, this divine fire. Let the fire warm but not consume you. I invite clients, use it. Anger is energy. And if you help them see that energy as such, then you can help them activate it and use it for something to protect their boundaries or to right or wrong, whatever it is. So basically, very quickly, these three uh, specific conditions that I wanted to mention to you. Now, I also want to mention very briefly this idea of interventions. And we'll be doing a lot of exercises, but even before we jump into that, this is more class 9, so um, switch from class 8 conditions to class 9. Interventions. What are your thoughts about interventions? It's funny, but most students are really interested in learning interventions. They want to know something to do. If there's something they really appreciate is when in class some of your professors teach you something. That's why they like Gestalt so much, because it's full of little exercise, like the empty chair exercises or working with some personalities and so on and so forth. Um, so what are your thoughts about it? I don't remember if I mentioned in class, but Rollo May, one of the founders of existential psychotherapy, was very critical of using interventions. He called them gimmicks. And he said that the problem was, he was very, very critical. And he actually said that the problem with psychotherapy was that psychotherapists were not being taught anymore to be with the raw reality and the problems that clients have. So we either become anxious because we don't know how to be with reality as it is. And then we suggest, well, let's try a little something, a little experiment to reduce the therapist's anxiety. That's not what we need interventions for. So think about that. The other reason is because we want to entertain our clients. There are so many forms of therapy that clients go like, well, you know what, you're not doing anything exciting. My last therapist, he did a lot of this exercise and he gave me to do this and this, that. So we feel like we have to entertain our clients. And then Rollo makes this interesting question. If we take away the gimmicks, what is left as a therapist? And what he's saying is left is the raw experience of being alive, the existential angst of being alive. Can you be with that? Can you be with that? Now, some even say that the whole problem, the whole thing about religions is precisely to deal with that anxiety, to reduce that anxiety. So think about that. It's interesting. And when you start really trying to learn new gimmicks and become specialized in one thing and another and another and another, could it be because you want to reduce your anxiety or entertain your clients? I use them. I have nothing against them, but I want you to pay attention where they are coming from. There are hundreds, just like with any approach to psychotherapy, there are hundreds of cute exercises and things to do that you can do with clients to engage there in different levels. Sorry. So a question is, what modalities are we going to use? Even in previous class, we've done exercises that can be adapted to work with clients. There's a lot of things to be said about creative approaches. We have a whole program, expressive arts, that work with drawing and movement, and we may do some other things. We've done already a lot of exercises with drawings to bring what is within without expressing a piece of paper. So there are a lot of different things. But again, it's important to understand what are we trying to accomplish? How are we trying to engage the body, somatic approaches, the mind, and spirit? What does that even mean? What does it mean to engage body, mind, and spirit? And a question for you, how does that help? Why shouldn't we just talk and talk and talk? Freud called it the talking cure, right? So of course there are good reasons not to just talk and talk and talk, but I want you to think. So you see, I'm trying to put you between Rollo May saying don't use gimmicks to avoid anxiety or reduce boredom, and on the other side, shouldn't we just talk and talk and talk? And what is the problem with talking about it? And another question for transpersonal psychotherapy, again, beyond cute interventions, and there are many, 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 and I'll continue giving you suggestions, but and I say cute because sometimes you're like, wow, that's a really cool one, and we want to do it, but again, I said that already. How far are you going to take it? Are you going to use non-ordinary states of consciousness with your clients? We even suggest that psychotherapy in itself is a non-ordinary state of consciousness. What interventions are you willing to use? Are you going to suggest, as in the readings, bibliotherapy? Right? Borstein loves to recommend the Course in Miracles, for example. We could do shadow work. We can do eco-psychology. Working in nature is a very profound and why not spiritual. For many people, nature and spirit are closely connected. So prayer, dream work, forgiveness, some specific things that we're going to do, focusing, the freeze frame practice, inner dialogues, active imagination, visualization, journaling, dialoguing. There are many practices that helps us engage in these other levels of reality. I'm sure you already have a list of things that you've done in therapy that have worked for you, that have worked for your clients. And I invite you to continue thinking about it, but always thinking, what am I trying to accomplish here? And why is this a good time to do this type of exercise, this type of intervention? Okay, my dear students, so this is it. This is the end of this video. And again, this one covers the class on intervention, the class on specific conditions, and the class of interventions. See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.